Story 2 by Charles. Are you ready?
It was my first day working for this plumbing company. I was called in for my first job to this house out of town. The plumbing company had 5 employees, and the owner would choose who does what job. I don't see it as a coincidence that I was sent to some undesirable job far away in a shitty area for my first job. The call was for a leaky pipe under the sink, which is typically the easiest, most basic job to get a call for, depending on the root cause of it. I pulled up to the house, my first ever call, and it was an absolutely disgusting looking house, completely run down as if no one had lived there for years. I went up to the house and knocked until a middle-aged man opened the door. I didn't like his aura from the start. He had this unflattering, disproportionately wide smile that made his entire face appear off-putting. His voice was also really soft and high-pitched, not the voice I was expecting to come out of his mouth. Or maybe it was, given his unusual appearance. He welcomed me inside of the house. I realized there wasn't a single piece of furniture in the house. "Just moved in?" I asked him. He replied yes, and then chuckled. Or maybe I should say he giggled, because it was just a weird, high-pitched little laugh. He brought me to the kitchen, and the first thing I did was set my stuff down on the counter, then open the cabinets under the sink. I slid myself under the sink and started to examine the pipe, specifically looking at the P-trap and the lock nuts to make sure they weren't overly tight or loose. I noticed the man was standing directly over me, his legs spread wide so that I was sandwiched between both of his feet. It was extremely uncomfortable. I asked him politely to give me some space, and he backed up a bit, but not enough that would make me feel comfortable. I realized that I didn't see any water leaking at all, so I got out from under the sink and tried running the water, but no water came out of the faucet. I looked at the weird man and asked him why the water wasn't running. He said he must have shut off the main water valve without realizing it. When I say I stood there speechless for a few seconds, I'm not exaggerating. I asked him bluntly, "How do you do something like that by mistake?" He smiled and shrugged his shoulders. I asked him to go turn the water valve back on. He turned and said he'd be right back, and I saw him leave the kitchen, but then I heard footsteps walking upstairs. I'd never in my life heard of a water valve being upstairs in any house. I knew something was off with this guy and the situation. Everything from the condition of this house to his mannerisms. And then I started hearing multiple sets of footsteps from upstairs, coming down the steps quickly. In a split second, I decided I was out of there. I grabbed my stuff and quickly walked out to the front door and to my van. I'm a pretty large and loud dude, so I'm not really intimidated very easily by people in a physical way. But there was something about that situation and that guy that told me that some shit was about to go down. I looked at the house for a second, and then I drove away. I called Dave, my boss, letting him know it was just some kind of prank, because that just sounded better than me saying I was scared of that guy. I did a few minutes worth of investigating and found out that that was just a vacant, abandoned house. I got the number that made the call for the alleged leaky pipe from Dave, and it turned out to be a voice over IP number, not even a real number. I reported this shady encounter with the local police department just so that they would be aware of it and maybe close off that house. I've never had a reason to return to that sketchy part of town again. I only worked for that specific plumbing company for about a year.
Story 3 by TC. Are you ready?
Back in 2019, I worked for Domino's. It was my first night. I was just starting out. I was only working there because I needed the money for college, supplies for my dorm, etc. And so that night I was being trained. When you're being trained, you're accompanied by the manager on your first few deliveries to see how you do and evaluate you and train you. It was late, around 8 o'clock, and we got an order. Our store wasn't electronic like they are today. We couldn't see where the locations were on a big TV. We had to go look them up on our phones for directions. We got the directions and the pizza. I still remember the order. 4 large pizzas with 2 bottles of Pib. We load them into the car, and it was my car since I was the one being evaluated. So it was me, my manager, and another trainee who I didn't know. The house we were heading towards was way out of the way in the middle of nowhere. My town was old though, so it was fairly common to go miles without anything. It took us around 15 to 20 minutes to get there. The house looked old, Really old. It was an old 2-story home, and it was completely run down. The wood was chipping, some of the windows had boards on them. It was not a house you'd expect people to be living in. I remember asking my manager if we had to go up there, and he told both of us yes, but that he'd come with us and hand them the pizzas and sodas. I hesitantly got out of the car and noticed that the other guy who was new was very nervous as well about walking to that front door. We finally started making our way to it, when the other trainee said he thought he saw someone watching us from the furthest window from us, upstairs. Our manager told him he's just paranoid, and that this shouldn't take more than a minute or two, making sure to tell us to stay calm and be nice. I don't know how I had the courage to ring the bell, but I did, which of course didn't work, so my manager pounded on the door. No answer. We waited about 15 seconds and knocked again, harder this time. Still no answer. We were all getting impatient, and there was a smell of something rotten. We couldn't tell if it was the house or if something inside had died. Finally, after about a minute of impatiently waiting, someone opens the door, but not completely. They open the door only showing part of their face and asking who we were and what we wanted. My manager said we had their pizza, and the guy quickly unlocked the door and acted all friendly towards us. It freaked the three of us out. It was an older gentleman, in his 50s at least. He told us it took him a while to open the door because it's hard for him to get around or some shit. Our manager handed him the receipt and asked if he was paying with cash or a check, and the man told us he'd be back with the money. He left the front door open, so I looked around to see what the house looked like inside. Empty. Completely empty. No furniture or anything in that house. Just the floor and a couple of blankets. Obviously this guy was homeless and was just living here since no one else was. That's when we heard footsteps coming from upstairs. More than one person too. That's when we got uncomfortable about the situation. The realization of what the other employees said became true. Someone was probably watching us as we walked to the front door. My manager yelled out if the man had the money yet, but he never got a response back. The footsteps stopped. Everything just stopped. It became silent. You could just hear the three of us breathing. My manager told us to stay at the front door in case the man came back, and that he'd go around the house to see if the man needed help or something. We nodded at him and he walked towards the back. The two of us heard footsteps, but not from upstairs. They were coming from below us somehow. We both looked completely puzzled and confused, and honestly uneasy about this entire situation. That's when we heard our manager scream and heard frantic running. He ran to the front of the house where both of us were and told us to go back into the car and that we're leaving. I've never driven a car faster in my life. My manager explained to us that when he was walking around to the back, he saw a group of people in the darkness surrounding a sort of makeshift campfire, but it was very small. He got closer to them and noticed in the middle was a baby deer. The group of men were sitting around laughing at it as if they found it funny. The minute he said that, my heart almost stopped. The new guy and I quit right after, and I heard the manager quit a month after this. I'd never worked a delivery job again. Obviously,